What's the creepiest/scariest thing you've seen but no one believes you? I used to have a buddy that lived in the same neighborhood, a few streets over. One night we were having a couple of beers in his backyard while playing cards. I had some things to do the next morning, so just before 10 I said my goodbyes and shoved off. It was a short walk, maybe 15 minutes door to door, so I never drove. Anyway, it was a nice night, uneventful trip. But when I got home, my roommate was coming out the front door, coffee in hand, and dressed for work. He gave me a funny look and said he thought I was asleep since my truck was in the driveway. I told him where I'd been and asked why he was going into work at night. That's when he kind of laughed and asked if I was drunk. We stared at each other for a minute and then he told me it was just after 5 in the morning and he was going in just like he usually did. In my entire life, I'd never felt more confused than I did in that moment. I could tell he was dead serious, but I knew I had just left my friend's house. I checked my phone and sure enough, 5-something in the a.m. My roommate left for work. I paced circles in the living room for a bit, then called the friend whose house I'd just left. He groggily answered and confirmed I'd left at 10 the previous evening. I have no idea what happened during those 7 hours of my life, and it gives me chills to think about it all these years later. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't tired, no one could have slipped anything in either of the 2 Coors Lights I'd had, no known medical conditions that would have caused me to black out, and nothing has happened like it since. I just don't know what happened to that time. I was walking to class from the dining hall on my campus when I saw a lady yelling for help and banging on a window of a nearby building. Lots of people were walking past, but I was the only one who seemed to acknowledge it. I went to the window to help and she told me she was locked in a room in the building and that she needed me to come in and open the door. Now, I have no idea the layout of this building and where she was located. So I decided to call campus security for help despite her pleading with me not to call them and to just let her out. I call them and when I hear them coming I go to greet them so I can take them to the window. I leave for maybe a maximum of 15 seconds and when I return with campus security she is gone. We can't see her at the window and campus security goes inside to double check and sure enough there is no trace of her. Campus security definitely thought I was crazy and I'm sure my professor thought I was full of shit when I explained to him why I was late. No one seems to believe me that this happened, but I swear it did. FAQs: I am female / it is a very old campus with lots of random historic buildings that people don't really use and this building was one of them / the area has a very high crime rate so it probably was a robbery. Had my laptop in my bed just before going to sleep, not plugged in, on battery. Made an offhand comment on some website about how I wasn't scared of ghosts and didn't believe in them. Then I turned it off and went to sleep with the laptop beside me in my bed. Next morning when I try to power it on, nothing happens. But the laptop feels unusually light. That's when I realized the battery had been physically removed and placed in the kitchen. I was alone in my apartment and do not have a history of sleepwalking at all. I saw a panther-sized black cat darting out of a water retention / artificial forest near a school in the desert. Logically, it shouldn't be able to survive there, but holy shit, I saw it. Animal control wouldn't let that exist, there isn't really food enough for it, and the summers get dangerously hot if you've got black fur. Must have been 4 to 5 feet long. It doesn't make sense, but I 100% saw it, and so did the friend I was with. I was at the scene of a suicide, work-related. Guy shot himself with a shotgun, right under the chin. When I walked in, a black cat was sitting in his blood and staring at me. Really weird. Edit, for the ones calling bullshit, that's cool lol. The wife called us. His wife and kid came running out of the house past me as I got there. The detectives came out after the fact. And it was his own cat. Not quite sure how young I was at the time, but it was probably between 5 to 8. I was in my babysitter bed at the time in her trailer park. It was 3 a.m. I had woken up because I had to pee. When I woke up, I looked down the hallway to see my babysitter leaning against the wall like one of the stereotypical cool guys do in movies. And I made eye contact and I felt my body go cold because she was still sound asleep next to me in bed. I went under the blankets trying to hide, and when I looked back she was gone. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I've never told anyone. I just sat in her bed watching infomercials until 6 a.m. when she woke up. Never even thought about sleeping there again. I honestly forget how much this affected me until I started writing this. Really freaked me out, man. Edit, since I never told anyone, I don't know if it belongs here, but no one in my family believes in ghosts, so if I were to tell them, I guarantee it'd be dismissed. Footsteps and banging in my attic. For about 2 months, almost every night I would hear from my attic. The steps are only like 5 feet from my room, small taps or footsteps. Then it gradually got louder to the point it sounded like an audible foot was pressing on the wood. I told my dad and he told me it was probably an animal that got up there or something. Thing is, my sister heard it too, as her bedroom was in the same hallway as mine. My dad might have been right, as it was completely gone after 2 to 3 months, and right now at 2 a.m., I don't hear it. And I swear to God, if I hear it after I post this, I'm actually gonna piss my pants. Edit, a commenter also reminded me that about 3 times I heard a loud bang, like something knocking really loud on the roof. My heart would skip a beat when that happened. I'm so fucking relieved whatever was up there is gone now, or else I felt like I would've gone crazy. In the same room of my old house, I have seen a convulsed face floating outside my window. My brother has also seen it too. I saw the same face over a number of periods, and it would do stuff like smile and float closer and further from the glass. Our youngest brother a few years later complained that he didn't want to play with the boy in his room anymore as he was getting too much blood on his toys. It was the same room. Not sure if it counts as creepy or overall scary, but it was weird. Back in high school I lived in a large apartment complex. It was maybe around 8 to 9 at night and completely dark. I was with a group of friends, 4 or 5 people. We were just talking and messing around with a friend's pair of walkie-talkies as we decided to look up in the sky as 2 fireballs, or what can be described as fireballs, just appear in the sky and slowly move in a line. Just as that happened, we started getting what sounded like military communication over said walkie-talkies that was really static, but words came in every now and then. About 10 or so minutes later the fireballs disappeared and the communication cut out. There was absolutely nothing about this on the news the next morning, and no one ever believed me. Edit, the sky was clear, no clouds, and the only military base in my whole state was 30-ish miles away. Luke AFB. I woke up to something, It sounded like a door shutting. At first I thought it was a dream because I could hear it in the dream as I was waking up, kinda like when someone calls your name when you're dreaming. But then I looked at my cat, his hair was completely standing up and he was beaming at my bedroom door. This was the moment when I got really scared. I know animals can pick up on that shit and I thought he might know something's wrong. My cat doesn't do this type of thing unless a dog is in the room. So I looked over at the door and the only way I can describe it is it looked like it was swaying, slowly, like it was breathing, like someone was standing on the other side of it trying to hear if I was awake. This swaying was accompanied by a shadow. Asterisk, I don't mean a supernatural shadow, but it looked like the shadow of a person behind the door. I was paralyzed in fear. I lied there for 5 minutes naked watching this door away. I considered yelling and trying to scare them away, but I was terrified someone might respond. I legitimately thought this was the moment where I will have to defend myself or be killed. I don't own a gun, but after 10 minutes or so I mustered up the courage to check every room in the house. I fucking checked every corner too. But there was no one there. I don't know what happened, but my evolutionary traits kicked in and I completely believed someone was outside my door. Edit. The, accompanied by a shadow part was not a shadow figure, it was like the shadow you'd see if something was on the other side of a cracked door. I don't know if that makes the story less scary or what, but just wanted to be clear. Just after high school, maybe 6 months or so after 9/11, I was a van driver who drove the meals for Meals on Wheels to the place where they get packaged up and taken for home delivery. Anyway, the delivery van only had AM/FM radio and I was listening to 92.5 FM, when all of a sudden the station cuts out and a transmission that I can only describe as an American version of a numbers station began playing. It was seemingly random numbers followed by a long period of the same phrase repeated over and over again. The phrase was "they took the crosstown bus," over and over again. None of the other drivers heard it, but man was it creepy to hear. Eventually the regular radio station came back on and they never mentioned anything about it. I wrote about this a while ago. None of my family really believes me, everyone just dismissed me as imagining things. Copy and pasting below. So I was getting on the elevator in the metro. To get from the train platform to the main platform with the turnstiles and exit, you have to take the elevator. So I got on with this older guy, it was just us two. And I glanced over and this guy was watching me. Pointedly. And he was smiling, but not in a nice, welcoming way. You know, in cliché creepypastas where they talk about monsters with unnaturally wide smiles. That's exactly the kind of smile this guy had. Anyway, I looked away from him because I thought he was just crazy or something. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw him making these weird gestures all over his chest. It almost looked like he was making the sign of the cross or something. Finally, the elevator doors opened and we both got off and walked towards the turnstiles. I swiped my card to exit and then turned around to see if this dude was following me. And he was gone. There was nowhere else he could have gone, we were at the only exit for the station. Unless he turned back, ran and got on another elevator in about 4 seconds. I don't know. I don't know where the fuck he went. Anyway, I'm from a small town and sometimes weird things happen in the city that I don't quite understand, but I just chalk it up to me being practically a redneck. But this was really out there. And it's been bothering me. Anyway. There we go, that's all. Thanks for reading. Ghost story time. I was living with a few of my friends a year and a half ago, and we're all pretty religious, at least 2 of us work in religion. We were talking about how we didn't believe in ghosts or demons, at least in the sense that we couldn't see them if they were real. We started talking about how if we saw one it would change our perspective entirely. I said out loud, if something is here I wish it would just show us. 2 nights later I'm sound asleep and have the most vivid, brutal nightmare I've ever had. Long story short, I was in my childhood house, we were getting robbed, and the robber shot my father, only it was me, I was the robber. My father and I had a very strained relationship, and the detail of the shooting woke me up in tears. I mean, I was sobbing. I looked at the foot of my bed and saw a man sitting on his heels staring at me. It looked like he was 80 years old but never hit puberty, that's as best I can describe it. His face looked kind but his eyes looked so wicked it struck terror into my soul. He almost looked curious, but morbidly so. He was wearing clothes that looked like he was a newspaper salesman from 1890s New York. I only saw him for a split second and he was gone. The wild thing is I got all of that detail in just a split second, like he wanted me to remember him. Here's the crazy part. So I was spooked to shit, right? I went into our living room and watched YouTube and some Twitch streams for a bit until I convinced myself I was just half asleep and still spooked. I lay back in bed and the moment my head hits the pillow my roommate sits straight up in bed, still asleep, points at the foot of my bed and says, "My name, who is that?" I lost my goddamn mind. I literally drove home at 3 a.m. and told my parents through tears I wanted to stay home until summer. I stayed at home for a week or so and then went back. My roommate started having night terrors after that, but we moved soon after. I've never been so scared in all of my life. Edit, I've had question about my roommate's night terrors. The one I saw happened the first night I was back. Basically we're both sound asleep and he wakes up screaming. I don't mean yelling, I mean screaming. It sounded like an animal in pain. For those of you who have been hunting before, he sounded like a deer screaming after being shot. I got down on the floor, he just slept on a mattress, and tried to calm him down, but we locked eyes and he started to try to climb over me still screaming. He looked afraid, absolutely terrified. After 2 or 3 minutes he stopped all of the sudden, started mumbling and went back to sleep. I was holding his hands and our fingers were locked like when you wrestle, and I had bruises the next day because of how hard he squeezed. The next morning I asked him if he remembers waking up screaming and he said, "No, but I had a crazy dream. You got down from your bed and started attacking me, but you were covered in this black sludge. Like your face was melting off, but it was this tar-like goo that smelled like decay." After that 2 of my other roommates and I got together and prayed in our room. Nothing quite as bad happened after that. Some other less entertaining stuff happened, like couches being stripped of their cushions and things spilling in the middle of the night. One time a bottle of wine just fucking exploded out of nowhere and scared us to death. Thanks for the silver, was my first. Edit number 2, to be clear, I'm a seminary student and I work in ministry for high school students. Not exactly a youth pastor, but sort of. I don't believe in spiritual healings or anything like that. I'm much more naturalistic about my beliefs, but these things really happened. Whether it was a hallucination or genuine spiritual thing, I have no idea. I don't like to think about it. No one ever believes me when I tell them this except the few people that are involved. My dad thinks we are just too imaginative, even though my mom and I will tell the exact same stories at different times, never having talked to each other. But anyway, here's what I have to contribute. It's a copy and paste BTW. I've told this story on Reddit before. My story starts when I was roughly 8. My parents bought an old farmhouse that's over 100 years old. We found newspaper clippings in the wall when they renovated it from 1864. I had 2 brothers at the time and we were all outside playing, and they had a tendency to pick on me, so I decided I was done putting up with it and went in the house to tattle, as year-olds do. I yelled several times for my mom and finally got back. "What is it, dear?" asterisk. Not seeing her, I yell, "Where are you?" Again I hear a voice, "I'm over here, dear." I don't see her and call out again. This repeats about 4 times, and as I get closer and the voice gets louder. I passed by a window and glanced out to see my mom and dad out in the distance working on a tractor. My heart jumps into my throat and I book it outside. My brothers are exactly where they were when I went in, so I know it's not one of them messing with me. Throughout the years I hear voices and TVs and strange noises constantly throughout the house, but just assume I'm hearing things move up a bit to me being 17. Parents left town for a few days and I had some friends come over. Night starts off normal, we play some video games and all is well. 2 of my friends need to use the bathroom, so one goes downstairs and one stays upstairs since there's 2 bathrooms in the house. First friend comes back from the bathroom and says, "Yes, really funny guys," to the 3 of us that are in the room. We have no idea what he talking about. He said banging on the door and making weird sounds while I'm taking a piss, so funny. We are all genuinely confused as we haven't moved. He doesn't believe us but sits down and rejoins the group. Now the second friend comes back from downstairs and has a similar complaint. He says we were bouncing a ball, shuffling things around, laughing outside the door, and heard us run off when the toilet flushed. We again are confused, especially since there weren't enough of us to mess with both of them at the same time. Conversation kind of drops, but neither seem convinced we did nothing. A couple hours go by and for some reason the conversation comes up again. We deny it, they dpnt believe it. Eventually that turns into jokes about ghosts and how we disturbed them when the house was remodeled. I was about 13 when we started remodeling. Jokes continue and someone said, "Ah, come on now, you can't really believe that ghosts exist." And everyone is like, "Now they probably don't." On the other side of the room is a single fold closet door, and right as we said that, this door explodes open so violently that the folds slam together and bounce almost back shut. We immediately end that conversation, flip every light in the house on, and no one dared to touch that door. The next day I wanted to make sure something didn't fall, but as I open the door there is nothing close to the door, nothing big enough that even could have fallen to slam that door open. Move forward to me being 20 and telling my mom of the weird things that I witnessed. She tells me, "Oh, I know, there's at least a family of 3 that I know of." Two little boys, one always has a bouncing ball and the other giggles a lot, and an old man. I hadn't even gotten to that part in my story. Edit. Dear asterisk cause apparently this is a hot button issue for y'all. Not really creepy or scary, but my parents went canoeing in the middle of nowhere with some troubled youth. While they were on the river, their canoes capsized and people were having problems swimming and getting to shore. About 3 to 4 large men came out of nowhere and helped them all to shore, then completely disappeared afterwards. My parents swear they must have been angels, as there's no way they appeared and disappeared that quickly when they were in the middle of nowhere. When I was 3, we were picking up my grandparents for a Sunday drive. I was sitting in the back seat on the passenger side. My grandfather was sitting in front of me. Suddenly he keeled over, dead of a massive stroke. As they hustled my little sister and me out of the car and into my grandparents' store, I happened to look over my shoulder and plainly saw Grandpa walking down the street with 2 men. Both were dressed in suits, which made it all the more incongruous that Grandpa was wearing the same gray sweater and peaked hat he'd been wearing a moment before in the car. There was nothing particularly creepy about the experience, except that I wouldn't accept that Grandpa was dead because, after all, I'd just seen him walking down the street. Naturally, this didn't go over very well. But I loved my grandpa. I didn't want him to be dead, and I knew what I had seen. When our family doctor arrived to pronounce Grandpa dead, my mother asked me if I would take his word for it. We had a very good, trusting relationship with our doctor, so I said that I would. The doctor assured me that my grandfather had in fact died. But he was the only grown-up who didn't treat me like I was crazy. He listened respectfully as I told him what I had seen, and he suggested that maybe the men in the suits were angels. This seemed reasonable. Problem solved. But to this day I can still see Grandpa walking down the street with those 2 men. And no matter what my parents tried to tell me, it wasn't just a guy who looked like Grandpa coincidentally wearing exactly the same clothes he'd been wearing in the car. It was him. Not sure if this counts because I have at least 2 people that do believe me. After coming home from work one day, I was walking through my kitchen towards the living room when a frying pan just flew across the room, and hit me square between the shoulders. My roommate, and a friend of his both saw it happen, and lost their shit. Wasn't the only time we saw weird shit in that house. I saw a shadow person in the same spot almost every day. Heard extremely heavy footsteps stomping across our roof with no explanation. My roommate says he saw a full laundry basket just flip itself upside down while it was flat on the ground. He also claims to have seen an ugly little green goblin-looking demon in our living room one night. So, yeah. That's all I got. Edit. I see several people suggesting carbon monoxide poisoning as a possible explanation. We have several brand new detectors all through the house. Since it's a rental, we also just recently had to pass an inspection from the city that checked all the appliances, etc.